Maria Fyodorovna Semyonova with her big dumb face.
The longest opening sequence.
That is midlife crisis.
When are all chairs bolted to the...
We're not told that.
Yeah, we do.
We're not told that.
It is written. It is written. Welcome back to Rank Dumb Charles. I don't know much about Godzilla movies, but I know enough about movies to know that Godzilla -1 has everything the body needs. Starting with the big stuff, Godzilla himself is absolutely incredible. The visual effect is of such a high quality that at times I felt I had the suspension of disbelief of a child. But that's all just a cherry on top. Down at ground level is a story that leaves nothing to be desired. Among other things, it's the tale of one man's struggle to rid himself of his survivor's guilt following the Japanese army's defeat after World War II. On a larger scale, the story is a metaphor for post-World War II Japan's fear of a loss of cultural identity to the looming threat of American influence and power, done in the most Japanese way possible with a giant city-destroying monster and crowds of people running away screaming. Even if that's not really your thing, or you've never seen a single Godzilla movie, you can and should still check it out because this movie brings it on every level. McCurds? Do the scream. Do the scream. It's like higher.
Well, that
I can't get up
actually,
high
so fun fact, that sound, the Godzilla roar.
Gojira.
Gorgia.
Gojira.
Gojira. That roar is actually I believe it's a cello, and they took a rubber glove on a cello, and that's what makes that noise.
That's awesome. Next time I have a rubber glove and a cello. What is it again? Glad I insisted that you brought that cello. Next time you bring your cello. Living Daylights.
Yeah, man. Let's talk about Godzilla. Godzilla minus
Gojira.
-1. Gojira. -1. But as always, I have to pimp out the merch. Because it's the holidays, why not pimp out the merch? Get your Our Boy Mikey G Wiz shirt only at the Rank store for a limited time only.
We need an army of you dudes wearing Our Boy Mikey G Wiz shirts. Come on,
we need
represent.
a protest outside Michael G. Wilson's house with those t-shirts, and he's like, "What are you protesting?" Nothing. We just wanted to be here.
Yeah, we love you. You're our boy, and then he'll immediately sue us for.
And then the next
look how
day,
beautiful that is. Is that not a beautiful rendition of the man? It's
so
gorgeous.
Yeah. And then next we need to go to Martin Campbell's house. Martin Campbell's.
He would just start shooting. Knowing him.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about Godzilla -1, written and directed by Takashi Yamazaki.
Can I ask a really dumb question right off the bat?
Yeah, what's going on?
Why is it called -1? Did I miss that?
Okay, I do have the answer to that question.
Okay,
so
good.
I will answer that. I will answer that now. I was going to save that for later, but I will say it. So the -1 refers to the fact that Japan had already been devastated by World War II, brought down to 0. But with the emergence of Godzilla, it has put Japan into the negative. So it's -1.
-1 what? Pride? Ego? I already mentioned that it's,
Japan was devastated after World War II. Did you see Oppenheimer?
Okay.
Did you see that movie that year?
Yeah, it's good to watch those back to back.
This is wow, what a twist. What a twist.
Yeah.
But yes, that's why they call it -0. It's Godzilla -0. It's a weird title. I will say it's not my favorite part of this movie is the title, because it's what?
I'm curious if that's the title in Japan or if they were just like, I don't know, it sounds cool in English. Just go with it.
That's the title. It is the title.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, so that is the title. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? I'm going to go through a history of Godzilla. It's going to be awesome. Chucky, I know, like everyone, you are vaguely aware of Godzilla, like most people. Let me give somewhat of a crash course of the franchise, but I'm not going to go into each film, just a brief crash course, essentially. So Gojira, as he is called in Japan, or Godzilla here in the US, made his debut in the 1954 film. There's been 38 films produced, 33 in Japan by Toho Productions, or Toho Company Limited, whatever you want to call it. and
Loved how
5
they
in the
opened with the
US
classic. They opened with the
with
classic
the
Toho.
Toho. But that's no, like all the
Have
Toho
they ever
movies,
modernized it, or is that
I
how
think
it's
that's
been for decades?
every time I've seen a more recent Godzilla movie, they've used that logo on
Okay,
pretty
because
much
that, I mean,
all
that
of them.
goes back to
So
the
that
beginning.
Toho logo. Yeah,
Yeah,
because that Seven Samurai and all those other Akira Kurosawa films is the Toho logo, and I love that logo.
because
It's just
obviously, like in
yeah,
the States, every single studio has
Warner
slowly but
Brothers
surely
and
modernized
Paramount.
everything. Like at a certain
Right.
point, they made everything CGI, so it was all crisp and clean and high def and all that. And then so to see this, I was, it could have been a coin flip for me. Like, is that because this
I'm
specifically
fairly
me
sure
not
that's
knowing
the
a lot
same
about the
logo.
history? Okay, but me not
Yeah,
knowing a lot about the history, I was like, it could go either way. But how cool, because this movie feels like the first Godzilla movie ever made.
right.
Me not knowing anything about it, that's the impression I had, which is
Okay.
really cool.
So, okay. So, as I said, there have been 38 films produced, 33 in Japan by Toho, and 5 in the US. We will get to the US ones shortly. His name came from the combination of the Japanese words for gorilla and whale, which became Gojira. There's a little bit
Mm.
of a story there where apparently there was some guy who worked at Toho that they would call him a gorilla whale, and like that's how the name stuck. But I
Okay.
don't know if that's true. Like they're not sure if that's true. But then, of course, when it came over to the US, it became Godzilla because that's just like Godzilla,
So like a
giant
guy's
lizard.
looking down the hallway and he sees a group of people talking, and then gorilla whale guy turns the corner and they all
No
get out of the
difference.
way. They're like, ah, it's Godzilla, and the guy, he was like, bing, light
Yeah,
bulb.
that's the perfect name. I don't know if there's a lot of different stories, but apparently most people will say that it is a combination of gorilla and whale. Like that part's true. No
Makes sense.
one's 100% sure how that came to be. And then when it got imported to the US, it sounded a lot like Godzilla. So then they Americanized it to Godzilla in the US, and so
Wow.
that is then therefore a legend is born. This film helped pioneer suitmation and tokusatsu films, Japanese special effects films and TV. Generally speaking, like anything Power Rangers, anything Ultraman, Godzilla, people in giant suits, live action special effects in Japan is usually referred to as tokusatsu. It should be no surprise that ever since the first film, Godzilla has become an allegory to the nuclear holocaust that plagues Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II, which kind of also I wrote in your ties to Oppenheimer, which is a lot of people have said about this movie is like, it's a sequel to Oppenheimer. I'm like, sure, sure. You can say that. You can say
There's
that.
even a character that's like a Japanese Oppenheimer. He's Mr.
Right,
Scientist
right,
Man who leads the way. Yeah. It's
right.
they,
So
oh,
God's
I cannot wait for the fan edits. I just can't wait.
That's awful. That is just awful. So Godzilla has also fought many other giant kaiju monsters through is now 70 years, like the beginning of 69 years. I think they were like rounding up. It's like it's 70 years because the first Godzilla movie came out in 54. 2024 will be its 70th anniversary. The monsters include you got Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Gigan, Mechagodzilla, and even America's King Kong. His different films have been through different timelines. So some of those films are direct sequels to the very first film, and then some of them are entire reboots and reshoots. But kind of like that little timeline slide right there. Kind of think of it similar to what was the movie? The Halloween franchise, like the Halloween franchise has kind of it's like this one timeline, and then there's this version of the timeline. That's how the Godzilla films have kind of, as far as their canon has gone. It's been all over the place in that regard. But let's talk about the US films real quick.
Real
So
quick
you
though,
probably are
this right
aware,
here, Oppenzilla, that would have
Appenzilla,
been so much better than Barbenheimer if I know Barbenheimer worked because they're such opposites of each other
their
that's why it became a
contrast.
meme.
Yeah,
But how
right.
awesome if these two would have come out the same weekend, and you go into Oppenheimer, you come out, you go into
Go to Godzilla.
-1.
Godzilla minus
That
zero.
would have
Yeah,
been,
minus
that'd have been
one.
too good to be true. Go ahead.
Yeah. They would work. So you're probably aware that this has nothing to do with the Godzilla vs. Kong, which came out only a few years ago, and now we are getting trailers for a new film in that franchise next year with Godzilla X Kong new empire, as well as the Monarch TV series, which is on Apple Plus. Godzilla has had an interesting history with the US, not only because of the obvious allegorical reasons, but because we've had some US adaptations that were solely US produced, some better than others. First film was released in the US 2 years later as an Americanized re-edit of Godzilla King. It's called Godzilla King of the Monsters, the very first movie, right? Starring Raymond Burr. You may remember was the killer in Hitchcock's Rear Window. He was also played TV's Perry Mason. So there's like basically it's the re-edited version with American footage of the very first Godzilla film with this one American actor so that they can make an American version. And I mean, it's the mid 50s. So they weren't doing subtitle films that were just coming across the seas as much as they were. So, they were like, oh, how do we make money off this movie? Let's put American actors in it. And that's how we'll sell it. And
it's such an odd thing
crazy.
that always ends up being the case with anything Japanese made, right? Power Rangers, let's take the action scenes, but then the teenage high school scenes, we'll just shoot that with American kids and then we'll combine them. They don't reshoot the action stuff. So what you're saying is the same concept here, right? So let's take all the Godzilla action, and when they cut to the office building with everyone screaming and
yes
pointing,
and no,
it's just American.
There's
actors.
A little more. So I have that movie. I should have brought it down here. I have it on Criterion, so you can watch the original Japanese version and the Americanized version. The Americanized version is basically like the same story. It's just Raymond Burr kind of plays this narrator character that you latch onto, who's kind of the main character in this version.
But they shot that footage.
He's like a news,
right?
So he's like a news reporter reporting on Godzilla from the U.S. in Japan.
Okay.
And then in the Japanese version, it doesn't exist, but it's still the same footage. The story is not necessarily attached to one particular character. In the Raymond Burr one, it's like he's the main character. He's kind of just narrating, kind of like War of the Worlds, right? Like War of the Worlds, the radio play. It was like somebody announcing like this. Oh yeah, the alien's coming and this is happening. It's kind of like that in the Americanized version.
My point being that we don't do that with anybody else. We're like, oh, you got to check out this really good, or like, look, we have this really cool German movie, but we're gonna cut out all the German actors. We're gonna replace. Right. No, they just import the whole movie. So why is it about awesome Japanese action that it's like these a-hole producers are like, this movie's great. What's with these Japanese people? Sir, it comes from Japan. Get rid of them. Like, why is it just Japan that we do that?
We will never do this. There's a whole rabbit hole you can go down through all the Power Rangers stuff. It's very fascinating. That even involves Spider-Man at one point. But that is an entirely, I would say it's similar, but it's almost an entirely different thing, because by now Power Rangers has got its own storylines and things that they have created that were just US stuff, but they still use some of the Japanese stuff too. But that's a whole other thing. Getting back on track, you may also remember the Matthew Broderick film from 1998, which was a huge disappointment and has largely been panned. They've even lampooned that version of Godzilla in one of the Japanese Toho films, where the actual Godzilla beats the shit out of the American 1998 Godzilla, which is fun. You can watch
That's awesome.
I think it's like Final Wars is the name of the movie, but Godzilla fights all these different monsters from all those other movies, including the Americanized Godzilla from that movie, and it kicks his ass. In 2014, Legendary Pictures began the Monsterverse with Godzilla, directed by the creator-director Gareth Edwards. We talked about him a couple episodes back. His film was a hit. I wouldn't say it was a huge hit, but it was a moderate hit. And it brought us now a new cinematic universe of films. So we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, The Conjuring, the DC films. You also have the Godzilla movies, with the Kong films as well. So that's kind of like the US's version. However, this kind of ties into this movie in a little bit. So the previous Toho film was Shin Godzilla. That movie was also sort of a reboot, reimagining of Godzilla. It did really well. I have not seen it. People have said really good things about it. But they were going to do a sequel to that. And they wanted to do a sequel, but they had actually made a agreement with Legendary Pictures. Toho had made an agreement with Legendary Pictures saying, hey, we won't release another film until after 2020, because they didn't want both of these films to coincide as far as the release dates, because they didn't want to confuse audiences, because they have this ongoing narrative with the Godzilla movies and the American ones as well as the Japanese. They didn't want an audience to be like, wait, but that happened in this movie. So they were like, okay, well, you can't make another one till after 2020. The last one was 2016. 2020 passed, then they started producing this Godzilla film. And I think that's my guess is they just didn't want to have competing Godzilla movies. Yes, I know one's the US, one's Japan, but like this is one of the few Japanese Godzilla films that actually got a US release in theaters. The last one was like in 2000 with Godzilla 2000, which only came 2 years after that US version of it. But I always find that kind of fascinating because it's like they're sort of competing franchises, but it's like still owned by Toho, but it's like definitely a US produced one. They filmed like King of Monsters, which was the second Godzilla one. They filmed that here in Atlanta. So it's like that stuff to me is kind of fun. Let's talk about the director, Takashi Yamazaki. I'm pulling my hair out trying to pronounce all these Japanese names, but I feel like
I'm doing a good job, shockingly.
I'm actually getting it down today.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I'm like reading. I'm like, that's how you say his name.
So, Nan's in your earpiece.
He's like Yamazaki. Yamazaki just rolls off your tongue too. So you probably never heard of him. I never heard of him. His first film was Juvenile, came out in 2000. He's since made many films. Some are adaptations of anime properties such as Lupin the Third or Space Battleship Yamamoto. He is also the head visual effects supervisor on many of his films, which is kind of interesting because a lot of times you usually have a director, writer, a DP, and then they'll have somebody who just does the visual effects. He's director and the visual effects person on a lot of his films, which is pretty impressive to me.
Yeah.
He said writing this film, he was influenced by the Japanese government's unreliability and worldwide anxieties during the pandemic. He was also influenced by films such as the original Godzilla, which we've talked at length about, and Jaws, which shouldn't come to any surprise as you're watching this movie. There was a lot of times where I'm like, this reminds me of Jaws. This is a lot.
Yeah.
This is Godzilla and Jaws. This is great. I like this.
Bomb goes into mouth, shoot bomb explodes, face.
You're like, yeah. Definitely some Jaws. I have the cast list here. I'm not going to go through all the names. You will not recognize a single person in this cast from anything else. I will say the guy who plays the doctor, he is in a lot of Yamazaki's other films. He's had roles in other films. They've collaborated a lot. Kind of like how we talk about like Christopher Nolan's been with Michael Caine in a bunch of his movies. This guy is kind of his Michael Caine or Cillian Murphy. Michael Caine. Or to tie in Oppenheimer, Cillian Murphy. He's just like Cillian Murphy.
Yeah.
That's the crossover movie.
Get your fan edits going, everybody. Get your fan edits rocking.
Right. All right, so let's get into some quick fun facts about the movie because we'd already talked about why it's called -1. This is the first period piece Godzilla film. They've never done. All the movies they've done have all taken place in modern era when they were produced. This is the first time they were like, let's do a period piece Godzilla movie, and I think that's
cool.
Makes it way more effective. I think that's one of the things that made this movie very effective.
Again, as I said,
you take technology out of it, and it's World War II, like post World War II Japan, like just right after World War II.
Yeah,
it's good.
Me not knowing anything about Godzilla, I hesitated to put that in my little quick review because I'm like, has he always been a metaphor for the U.S. coming to invade and specifically with this, it's not like it takes place before or during the war. It takes place after, implying not just the destruction of Tokyo or Japan in general, but the demolishing of their culture. That was what I took from it. So, and you only get that if you go back to immediate post-war Japan. So, but we'll talk more on that.
There are some few. I literally pulled some of these off of IMDb. There are some few connections though to the original movie. Odo Island, the one that he goes to at the very beginning of the movie, was an island that was in the original film. I kind of forgot about it, but it's a fictional island. And I believe like he gets blasted by the nuclear bomb and everything, all that stuff that happens. In certain lore in Godzilla, like Godzilla's already a giant lizard monster, but now he's like supercharged with all of the radiation, the atomic energy and stuff. So then he becomes this giant monster. Other versions, he's always been that way. So it just it depends. Of course, like they can write whatever they want to do.
was a funny detail.
one of the-
They're
Right.
like, oh, that's Godzilla. The locals say, like, because he just shows up.
He just shows up.
He just shows up, and he's not super big, but he's big. He's like
Yeah. He's like a T-Rex.
Not Donkey Kong.
Bigger
but
than
yeah,
a T-Rex.
He's like a T-Rex. And they're just like, oh yeah, that ancient dinosaur that the locals talk about. And you're like,
your suspension of disbelief has to be
okay.
like, there's a lot of times this movie you're watching it and you're like, all right, I'll buy it. Just let's get on with it.
But not knowing
okay,
anything about Godzilla whatsoever, I was
you're
like,
just like, okay, I'm in for the ride. The other thing, okay, I didn't write this one down, but you see the plane that is the one with the propeller wing.
Yeah.
Plane that they talked about.
The tail wing. They kept
tail
saying.
wing. That's a real plane, and it was a real prototype that they had made in Japan. Now, the original, they only had one there was only one produced that they still had access to, and that actually was at the Smithsonian in the US. And they had to actually, Toho made another one based off the specs from that one for a prop model. And then they used that model, and I believe they took it and brought it to some, I think it was a museum or something in Japan. So now they have that actual model. And then they later revealed, like, oh, we actually made this for a movie. Like, that's why it was, they were like, because they only had like one of them, I think. So that's actually a real plane that actually did fly and everything. So it wasn't just a made up fictional thing. They actually did have it. And I believe it's similar to what they say in the movie, where it's like, yeah, we had these planes, we're going to use them. But then we got our asses kicked, and that war never came to us. So we just
damn Oppenheimer got us.
He got us, man. Yeah, that's dark jokes, guys. Dark jokes, everybody. Other little things, like there's little tidbits as you're watching the movie. So like I was talking about Odo Island, but like the whole train sequence. I'm watching the movie, I'm like, I've seen this before. And I realized in the very first movie, there's a sequence where he does the same thing with the trains, and he's like pulling the trains apart. And I got two pictures right here. He's pulling the trains, it's in his mouth. Very similar to the original film. So it's like kind of no surprise. Also, the other thing that I thought was a fun detail, there's a longer description of this, but they're talking about, like, there's 2 times in the movie you see the fish that are float up to the top of the water, and they've got like bulges coming out of their,
you see it a
their
lot.
faces. Right. So that is actually, so this is what IMDb said. The depiction of the floating dead fish with their insides sticking out is accurate. Deep sea fish often appear to have their tongues sticking out when brought to the surface due to the changes in pressure. The gas-filled swim bladders, which helps control their buoyancy in deep waters, expands as they ascend, pushing their jaws and tongues forward. A phenomenon known as barotrauma causes the protrusion and gives the impression of their tongues sticking out, when in fact it's a response to the pressure differences between their deep sea environments and the surface. They were hoping this is how Godzilla would meet his demise. So it's interesting setup that you're not aware of until the very end of the movie. You're like,
yeah, the whole time you're like, why do they have cancer? What's wrong with all these fish? So, and then they basically, spoiler alert, they try to give Godzilla the bends. Basically.
And there's one other thing. I didn't write this down. Spoilers for the original movie, but in the original film, they kind of have the film kind of plays out similarly, where it's like Godzilla attacks and they have to figure out a way to stop Godzilla. The only big difference is there's no like human drama that you're like sticking to a certain group of characters. It's just kind of like, and a lot of Japanese films seem to do this, where it's like you're a lot of people in rooms. There's a lot of people in rooms, and they're all got a plan. And like, this is the plan. This is what we're going to do. And there's not a single character that you're sticking to, like in a traditional Western film where you're like really gung-ho behind the back of that character. It's like, it's a team effort, everybody. We're all in this together. That's a lot of Japanese films feel that way to me. And
the trope I really don't like is when they, nowadays what they'll do to save time is they'll have the sequence of the, let's say it's a heist movie, and they'll show them planning it, but they'll intercut it with the actual heist taking place. And you're like, sometimes that ruins the fun.
I like that.
Sometimes, other times it ruins the fun and kind of the suspense of, okay, let's set it up quick and then let's go do it. And then you're in the moment, and it's more suspenseful in the moment.
It works better with something like Ocean's 11, where they show it and then they screw it up. Like in Ocean's 11 and in Mission Impossible, they show how they're supposed to do it, and then those
movies do it effectively.
Yes,
if they do what I'm talking about, they do it with majesty and grace. Other movies,
Right.
not so much. Other movies, you're like,
Yeah.
wait, what?
They use
Okay,
it
wait,
as
now
like
we're done?
as a crutch. Like it's like, yeah.
Yeah. They
This
even did
movie,
it in a
but
Matrix sequel, and it was like,
Yeah.
I think the first Matrix sequel, they do that, and it's like, well, you have to have played the video game. It's like, anyway, that's a whole different mess.
That's a whole other
Speaking of
Right,
fan
but
edits,
in this movie, what was I getting to? I was getting to the point where like it's very similar, and at the end of the original Godzilla movie, instead of this whole barometric pressure thing where they're gonna pull him down and bring him back up thing,
Yeah.
they use an oxygen bomb. Like that's the thing. Like it's a made up thing, of course, but they're like, yeah, we'll use an oxygen bomb in the water. So I can see that the writer was very aware of like, I'm aware of the original movie. Let's kind of make a more modern, maybe grounded take on how we would actually kill this monster instead of just saying oxygen bomb. And I love, and this is getting more into like our just general review and talk discussion, but I do love the setup of that whole sequence where we kind of, as we're meeting our main character, we get to a point where he's basically on a minesweeper boat, and that's when the movie kind of turns into Jaws a little bit.
Yeah.
And I love that sequence, basically that idea of these two boats with the cable and the sweeping the mines and stuff, that sets up the end of the movie in like a bigger way where you're like, oh, okay, I can kind of follow how this is going to work because I saw the smaller version of this. But now it's like this giant, lizard monster, and they're kind of doing the same thing as far as how they're going to trap Godzilla. So I kind of enjoyed those things too. But yeah, that's all I have for now. For Godzilla fun trivia.
Gojira.
Gojira. But yeah, Charlie, I guess we should start with the list. I mean,
yeah,
I'm looking at. I mean, maybe not top 10, but I'm looking up there.
I have one short phrase for you. John Wick threshold. I think that's all I decided on so far is that the John Wick threshold of John Wick is style over substance, action over any kind of real story going on. You're not there for like, to laugh and cry and all that. You're there to just be like, whoa, dude, Dragon's Breath. That's dumb. Look, he's spinning in a car, popping off headshots. This easily trumps John Wick threshold in that regard.
I will give you that. I think my maybe my highest. And here's the things that are holding me back on this movie is that yes, it is probably one of the best kaiju movies I've seen, and mainly because it makes you give a shit about the characters. I've seen all of the more recent Godzilla Legendary Picture movies. I enjoy those movies; they're fun. But I'm going into those movies. Those movies are the style over substance. They know that we're making these movies just so people can watch giant monsters fight each other for 2 hours.
Which is why I've never cared about them. I don't care.
I like those movies.
That's not my style. It's like, oh, look, giant monster punching another giant monster. I've never cared. So I go into this thinking it's going to be that. And then I'm
it's not.
pleasantly surprised.
And you watch those movies, and the more human character story stuff is very much lacking. The last two movies it's just so comic book and so Saturday morning cartoon that you're just like, whatever. I just want to see Godzilla fight King Kong or fight, this monster or whatever. So I'm like, I don't care. I get it. It's stupid. They lean into like making it really stupid. This movie, on the other hand, there's moments where I'm like, oh crap, I forgot we were watching Godzilla. Like I'm like really invested into like, oh, how are they going to survive? How are they going to survive? How are they going to get money for this little girl? How is he going to, what's life going to be like between these two? Are they going to get married? And then the whole human drama comes in. They're like, wait, his buddies from his work are all there at his house, and they're having dinner, and
your wife and daughter.
He's like, oh, your wife, and they're like, oh, we're not married,
and that's
not
my daughter.
And then he's like, wait, what? They're all like, what? And it's like beautifully and I can only describe this as Japanese blocking because you see it in so many Japanese films where there's a lot. They just are like many Japanese films that I've seen, Kurosawa, whatever. They are just very well adversed at doing like these really well blocked out scenes with lots of characters in small condensed spaces and small rooms. For America, we would be like, all right, we got to get let's get the close up on this person, let's get the coverage of this person, these films that usually play it out in a wide and then only go in the close up, like really, they really need those reaction shots from people.
Yeah.
And I just think they're just so well done. But yeah, that scene in particular, you're like, oh wait, there's a human drama story that's going on, and you forget that it's a Godzilla movie, and you're like, oh wait, Godzilla's in this movie. I forgot about that, and you just
Yeah.
kind of forget about it.
He
That
disappears
only
for long sequences,
and you're
right?
invested. You're like, I'm
Yeah.
into the story. I'm just like, this is a drama movie. Like this isn't a science fiction big
Yeah.
action movie until when it needs to be, and like even when it is, it's like those moments build onto the story that they've already built. So you really care about these characters as the movie's going on, and so you're invested. And I think that's awesome that like it's a not only there's a cultural barrier but a language barrier between what you're watching. So it shines through. Like the human stuff shines through where you're like, oh, I understand what's going on. Past the
You
fact
have
that it's like
you have this
there's so much,
entire
you have the empathy that you're like, oh wait, I get what's going on with these characters. I understand where they're coming from, and I'm not like, I'm not lost culturally, I'm not lost through language. I'm like, I get exactly what's going on in the scene.
Yeah.
And I think that's impressive that you can do a movie like that, and it's a science fiction monster film, and
Yeah,
you're like, oh,
exactly.
this is great, this movie's great.
Exactly.
So
It's
anyway,
very
back to my
unexpected.
but
So
that's my
there
thoughts on the ranking.
Okay, yeah, what
My
you got?
highest,
I wanna know your
so
number.
my high, I agree with your John Wick. I think it's better than John Wick. My highest, I don't. Here's the thing. The thing that holds me back on this movie is the very earnest matter of factness of the Godzilla aspects. And sometimes I think the movie gets a little too melodramatic for its own good. I'm also wasn't the biggest fan of the ending because I felt like it was just kind of too neatly wrapped in a bow. Where we're like, okay, and then
I'm
we'll make it even a
slightly
better
torn on the
ending.
ending. I'm slightly
I'm like,
torn
I'm
on the
like, I'm
ending
like,
because of what I was just gonna talk about, but give me
I
your
think,
give me your number, and then we can go back to
I
talking
think
about
it's
that.
below. I think it's below Guardians. I think that would
Okay.
be. It's below Guardians. I think it's between John Wick and Guardians. That's where I think it is.
Okay. I think that's more
That's where
than
I'd put the
fair.
movie at.
That's more than fair. Let's keep chatting because yeah, the best part of the movie is oh geez, what is the main character's name?
Hold on. Let me try to do it.
Because all I
Let me
remember
try
right
to
now
do
is
it.
Akiko. Akiko is the
Aki,
adorable daughter.
Kochiki or Kochi is his name. So it's
Okay.
Koichi. That's his first name, and then he
then it was
goes
like
by
Shimmy's
Shikishima. Shikishima is his
Shikishima.
last name, and
Shikishima!
sometimes Shikishima is his last name, and that's what he goes by. But yeah, he's the
Okay.
kamikaze pilot, and
Yeah.
he's basically like he has an arc. He has like a really great
He
arc.
has
Where,
the most awesome character arc ever, and I'm kind of torn on the ending because of that. But in a nutshell, the movie begins with him landing on that Odo Island because he's a coward. He multiple times he shows his cowardice multiple times throughout the movie,
Yeah.
and he was supposed to, kamikaze, divine wind. You're supposed to, Japan is losing the war, so they resorted to suicide bombings, flying their airplanes directly into battleships and whatnot. So that's what he was supposed to do, and he didn't. He pretended that his ship was faulty, and then he landed, and it was a great moment. I can't remember what the line was, but wasn't it something like the mechanic that he ends up being friends with basically said something like, I get it, man. Like when he's like, hey, we looked the plane over, there's nothing wrong with it, and Shimmy, I'll just call him Shimmy's like, and he walks off, and he's like, I get it, man. What's the point of fighting for honor and glory when there is none left, right? Like we're screwed anyway. What's the point? And that's anybody who surrenders at the end of a war. The only problem was that we're coming on the heels of November, where all I do is watch war movies and Band of Brothers in the Pacific and all that, and it's just night and days difference between the European theater and the Pacific theater, where any movie about the Pacific is closer to the Vietnam War than anything else. So you have the romanticized, you got the concentration camps, and we liberated the prisoners of these death camps and all that, versus in the Pacific theater, they're fighting these suicidal maniacs who are easily giving their life because they worship their emperor as a god. And then this story has that where he betrays, the emperor by, letting his cowardice get the best of him. He ends up not giving his life. So, and that arc continues later. But in the meantime, that emperor is gone, right? And everybody is just like, he goes back home and they're literally living in rubble. They're living in the a bombed out city, not from a nuke, but just, destroyed in the war. And the emperor's gone. And now they're like any other conquered people, basically, where they're at risk of their culture being completely demolished. And you do see that I've always observed this weird thing about, even like playing video games as a kid. It's as if because they were conquered and their god is stripped from them, the emperor's gone. It's like they started to worship Westerners. They started to like try to look like them, and they adopted our customs and all that. So how do you, if you're an older person, you're threatened by that, because you're like, no, we want to, okay, we need some of that because we've been conquered, but we also want to retain our culture. And how dangerous if it goes away too quick. I mean, look at you look at the Germans. The Germans started 2 world wars, and then all of a sudden they're known for like being oversexed and like producing too much porn or whatever post World War II. It's almost as if the powers that be injected sex into their culture to control them. Stop starting world wars. And they haven't started a third world war since, because they're distracted by sex and porn and Sakinki, right? So that's like the German stereotype now. It's all about Sakinki. All they want to do is to.
I don't know what
So-
German films you're watching, Charlie.
Well,
That's on you, man.
we'll get
I
into
don't know
that
what
after
you're-
hours. We'll get into that after hours.
After
But,
is that the new show that we're starting after the
yeah.
show?
Yeah.
After
yeah.
hours.
Oh yeah.
Ranked after hours.
But so then getting back to Japan though, that's what's going on. But then getting back to Shimmy's character arc, he thinks he's like, I should have died. He's got that kind of survivor's guilt cut with, his cowardice and all that. So I was really spoilers. I was really looking forward to him actually giving his life. I thought that him actually kamikazeing Godzilla would have
here's
been
the thing.
so dope.
I think you think it makes sense, but I think when you
There's a
come
big
down to
but.
it, hold on,
You're interrupting
there's a
my
big
butt.
And
Yeah,
I'm interrupting
go
your
ahead.
butt because I know, like, I knew going into this movie.
You interrupt my butt
knowing-
because it's kinky.
I know going into this buttocks. I know going into this buttocks. Going into this film. That sounds so fucking weird. Going into this movie, I knew your thoughts on
Kayvon wants me to
Dunkirk.
teach the children Sekindas.
Please,
He wants
please,
me to teach
please
Sekindas.
save us all. Save us all. No, I knew going into this movie that you were gonna like jump on the cowardice bandwagon. As the movies began, I'm like, oh great, I know where I
What does that
can
mean?
already you know what that means.
No.
You're done.
No. They like how.
Right,
No.
hold on.
No. My thoughts on Dunkirk have nothing to do with this movie.
I do think. Hold on. I do think it's
Dunkirk,
interesting.
Those are two.
All right,
different
we're not going down
concepts.
Dunkirk alley, but I will say this.
Sure, but
I
those are
think it's
two
interesting
different
that it's brought up.
concepts.
Sure, but when it comes to cowardice in as far as the kamikaze thing, I think there were a lot of people in Japan that were getting to basically the point that the guy says is just
Exactly.
like, we're killing ourselves for no reason, and
Yes.
we're basically being like, life is meaningless. Like, who cares about your life? Like, we should fight. Your life should be forfeit to Japan, and that's the greatest thing. And I'm like, no, like your life in itself is precious, and I think that's at the end of the
Yes.
day, that's the message is saying. It's
That's why.
yes, you are a
great.
kamikaze pilot, and you were supposed to do that, but like,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, you need to be around so you can raise your daughter, your surrogate
Yeah.
daughter. You need to be around to like, usher in the new era essentially. So there's like a more positive, uplifting ending. of
There's
the movie.
another theme that goes along with it, and that theme is everything you just laid out, where they're talking about how the Japanese government, throughout the whole story, they're talking about the Japanese government just pimps us all the time. And ultimately they're like, our government's not going to help us. The American government's not going to help us. So it falls on these everyday men.
Right.
And I love that. Because, it's like, whoever you know, you can just leave. No shame if you want to just leave and go take care of your families. And a lot of guys do. And then other guys are like,
Yeah.
no, we have to do this. That is sacrifice. The best stories ever told are always championing sacrifice. I'm all about that. In
Right.
order to fulfill that, you need the beginning to be cowardice. You're completely wrong that I would be turned off by this guy being a coward. That is the perfect setup for a redemption arc. Dunkirk,
Sure.
Dunkirk is over here. Dunkirk
We're leaving it over
on a
there.
whole, yes,
Is it over there?
Is
it over there?
It's over
It's over there, right?
Put
It's
it
over there. Okay,
It's
I'll
so
just
kinky. Anyway, so but
no, my point with that, Charlie, my point, just to be fair, my point with that
Okay.
is, as we're going into the movie and I'm sitting there and I'm watching the beginning of the movie, I'm sitting there like, God damn it. Like,
No, I was
that's
ready.
I'm like,
I
I hope, I'm
I thought it
just
was
like,
great.
I hope he doesn't, I hope this doesn't come in and we're like sitting in this movie and you're like, but I didn't like it because of this. Luckily,
It was
make
the
a good point.
perfect
It's like,
setup for
there's
an arc.
There's an arc. There's
Now
an arc.
I'm getting the impression that you have no idea what you do not understand.
I don't know
take
who
on
you
Dunkirk.
are. Honestly,
You do not understand my. Yeah, you don't.
I don't even know
you
who
do not
Chucky
know
is.
me at all.
I have no idea,
butthead.
guys. I don't know who this guy is. I've known him for 15, 20 years. No
Without
idea who he is.
explaining Dunkirk, well, I guess
Don't
briefly,
explain Dunkirk.
Dunkirk
don't
is
even
just
talk
like
about that.
it's the whole movie. There's hardly an arc in Dunkirk from like being a coward to not being a coward. It's just we're cowards, and then at the end, it's like how can we be heroes? And then meanwhile, there's some kid lying there who's got like his brains all messed up. Like the movie sucks. Action's good. The movie sucks. But this is different. It sets up right away. I mean, McCurdy, you couldn't be more wrong. A cowardice kamikaze pilot landing. Right away I was like, this is gonna be awesome because he has to sit with the shame of it. Like I said, it goes far beyond survivor's guilt because even guys who never did anything remotely coward-like in the war, just because they lived, they have a certain amount of survivor's guilt. Like, why did I live and all my buddies died? So this guy has both of those. So he's just haunted the whole movie. Now they build up to where he's like, I'm gonna finally fulfill my destiny of flying an airplane into something and blowing up. But then the scientist man lays out, as we already said, he's like, no, we have enough of that. I don't want anybody to die when we go after Godzilla. We're all this is no longer about giving your life for some butthead emperor. This is about us doing what needs to be done for ourselves and our people. And that's why I draw the conclusion that it's a metaphor for them, protecting their cultural identity as this nuclear giant, America, is going to come and take over, is going to destroy everything that they stand for, right? It goes beyond war because the war was ended by the time the movie started. So anyway, so that's why there's a difference between him planning to kill himself, planning to kamikaze himself, and like forcing it essentially, and him having to do it out of nowhere. So like if the best example ever is whether you love or hate Independence Day, it's got one of the best moments of sacrifice ever where, the drunk dad, he's like, hey guys, I got one more missile, but then the missile's faulty. So he has no choice but to fly directly into the alien mothership. Those are the best moments of sacrifice ever, where it's like, there is no choice here. I have to do it. Now here he had a plan, and so it's good. It's like you really think he's going to do it.
And they do set it up. Like that's the thing. They do set it up.
Why don't you lay out what happened? So
they set up a very clever thing in the movie where the scene that you're talking about, when everyone's gathered and they're getting the plan together, and the guy mentions that whole thing is like, no, we're not killing. No one's dying today. We're going to try to live. We're not going to die. No one's going to kill, like sacrifice themselves because our stupid government, our dumb government decided to make airplanes without ejector seats, and they made bad boats. And it's like that one very sly, simple line they threw in there, and I'm like, ejector seats. And then the movie, we get to the moment because we know his whole plan is, the whole plan at the end of the movie is that we're gonna sink Godzilla.
Real
we're gonna
quick,
sink
what a
Godzilla.
great
And we're gonna bring him
point,
back
though.
up.
He's like, don't rely on the government because the government doesn't care about you. We rely on each other. That's like
Right.
that is American to its core. Maybe that's why I love this movie so much. This story,
You're like,
'cause
"This is so
that is
American."
American as hell.
Yeah,
Whereas
right,
every other
right.
country's like, government is God. Worship government. You're like, you're pussy. You're a pussy. In this country, we're not supposed to
Anyway.
do that. We're supposed to hate the government in this country. But there's a lot of pussies today who worship the government, right? Big Brother. They don't have the Almighty Father on their back. They have Big Brother, and they're like, please, Big Brother, take care of me. Big Brother don't give a shit about you. So that's maybe this is the most American Japanese film I've ever seen, and so I resonate to it.
Okay.
And
Anyway, back to what I was talking about. Anyway, what I was going back to. So they have this plan laid out, but then we know that our main character, who is a kamikaze pilot, it's like, I've got to make up for lost times. I got to basically, I'm gonna get my plane. I'm gonna do the thing that I'm really good at in flying plane. And he gets the last plane that they could find, and it's this prototype plane. So it looks cool. You're like, memorable plane at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And he's like, my plan's gonna be, I'm gonna distract Godzilla. I'm gonna get him out to sea, and you guys are gonna do your thing. But
that probably won't work.
He's like, but secretly he's like, I remember when I was out at water and like we got the mine in his mouth and it blew up his face, but he grew it back really quickly. I bet you if I had a bigger bomb, I could blow up his head. And he never says this. It's kind of implied. He kind of says, I saw how to kill him out to sea. I think I have a better way of doing it, but he doesn't tell the rest of them. You're under the impression, the movie's making you under the impression that he's going to kill himself to kill Godzilla. And then that you're, again, all of that information, that one line from the one guy who says they didn't build ejector seats. And I'm just sitting there like, there's going to be an ejector seat. There's going to be an ejector seat. It was kind of like in Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
Like,
I was just going to ask.
Dark Knight Rises.
Remind you of a Batman movie? Yeah.
It was, but even the way they edited that sequence, because like he survives, like he puts the plane in his mouth right as he's about to use his atomic breath, and then he blows up his head, and you're like, oh no, he sacrificed himself. But then he's like, look, and then you see his parachute come down, and then of course they do the cut scene of like after he said, because originally I thought that the one dude was going to trick him and be like, yeah, this is the bomb safety, and actually that was the ejector seat button. That's what I thought was going to happen. But then he's like, I thought that's what he was going to do, but then he's like, that scene, he's like, okay, this is the bomb safety. You gotta do this right before you're gonna hit the plane, and then this is your ejector seat. So you gotta pull this. So he explains like that was the plan all along. They kept it from the audience.
Yeah, if it was the other way around, he would have pulled that safety and he would have shot out, and then he'd be like,
right,
you bastard, and the plane would have just completely missed, and he'd be like, we're all dead now.
Yeah. That's a different movie.
But
right.
That's still a cool idea. That's what I mean, where I'm like, I was like ready for him to off himself, but it would have contradicted everything that Scientist Man had laid out that we already stated about like, look, we all just went through this war where, we all know that like certain countries like Russia and Japan were definitely the worst in World War II, where they, and kind of China as well. China to this day, they're so overpopulated that they do everything they can to kill their people en masse, right? Like, whatever, pick a battle, and it's just like everybody just bum rush. Everybody's cannon fodder because they don't value any single individual, right? Whereas to the point that when they would when they would retreat, they would shoot their own men, which is the dumbest thing. Well, it's supposed to incentivize them completing the attack. Yeah, well, if the attack is impossible, then let them come back and then attack again. Like it's like it's as if they do it just because their people are expendable to them, and it's population control. And then that's so it's no wonder that here they're like, look, the government doesn't care about us. We have to do this ourselves. The government isn't going to destroy this cultural force coming to destroy our culture, right? America, like American influence coming to destroy everything we have just after they started rebuilding their homes, right? They literally just rebuilt their homes. And so we have to do it. We have to protect our customs. Again, I'm speaking metaphorically. We have to protect that which is ours, even though we've been conquered and all that. So I appreciate all of that. That's significantly deeper than anything I thought I'd ever find in a damn Godzilla monster movie. But
Because there are times you forget this is a Godzilla movie. You're like,
Yeah.
wait, oh, this is a guy. I was
Yeah.
like, I thought I was watching a period piece about post-war Japan, and then I was, oh, this Godzilla. And then, and then it gets really weird.
Psycho Man. This Godzilla just looked more intimidating, just terrifying. Yes, because it's like all bumpy and gross and like just the whole time it's like this.
Yeah, they purposely made
it like doesn't blink
so that they purposely based it off of some of the older models of Godzilla, so they wanted to go something closer to probably the second or third iteration of Godzilla from back in the day. And I think they did a really good job. I think part of it also is the visual effects supervisor. So he's probably had a lot of thought in being like, no, Godzilla should look like this. And I think if you watch the American movies, the more recent American films, that Godzilla is a little more, I mean, he's supposed to be more heroic in those movies. It's more of like, he is a monster. He is a terror. We got to stop him. But in the American ones, he's like kind of fat and chunky, and they make him a little more just bulgy. He looks more like an upright kind of guy in a suit a little bit, but there's kind of this creepiness to him. And I also enjoyed how they,
like, again, never blinked, but it would just move like this. Slowly, like this.
And I enjoyed I also enjoyed like the atomic breath stuff that they did, because they do something similar in other ones where it's like you see the tail and it lights up. This one, they were like, it lights the tail up, but his tail like it's charging, and like his dorsal fins start like popping out of his body as he's about to blow atomic breath. And then when he does, it looks like a atomic blast. Like it looks like another atomic bomb has dropped. And that to me, it's like, if the metaphor isn't big enough, like, here you go, like, there you go. It's another atom bomb, but it's in the form of a giant lizard monster.
Yeah. So. But it's, I'd say overall, like I said, one other small thing was that when we don't know that he's ejected. Everybody's just screaming after, Godzilla's head blows up and starts sinking. I think they waited until the reveal of him floating down, and then everybody started to salute.
Right.
And I kind of was feeling the opposite. Like, he gives his life, and even though they said don't, it was like it was a moment of desperation, right? And that's what's so great about moments of sacrifice. It's like he had no choice. He had to do it. I kind of would have liked for him to for them to have saluted, and then he floats down, right? I mean, it's not, and that's not a big deal. That's hardly even a nitpick. It's just a tiny detail.
When we get back in the edit bay, Chucky, I will make sure that we
just switch those shots around.
Switch those shots around. Let's just fix that.
My Zillaheimer fan edit.
Yeah, we'll fix it.
But that's what I mean. That stuff I'm fine with. But go ahead, and the other element is the ending.
The end ending is the one that I was like, I kind of wish this wasn't a part of the movie, because it kind of like did let me down. And
diminishes
diminishes a little bit of because so just to clarify what's going on. So as the beginning of the movie, he's this coward loser, comes back to Japan. His family is dead. His house is destroyed. He finds a house. His neighbor chastised the shit out of him, like, you were supposed to do your job, and now look what's happened. And as he's in the market, this woman stops him, hands him this thing, and you're not sure what it is, and it's a baby. And then he finds out there's this other woman, and he's like, he feels bad, and he feels bad for this little kid, and ends up taking care of this little baby with this other woman. And they are there for many years, like 2 or 3 years, right? And it to the point where it's like they are almost like married couple, and like that's their child, but they aren't married, and that's not their child, because she found this little girl that was left because her parents were dead, or the mom was like, no, take care of my baby. So now they're this kind of weird surrogate family that on the surface looks like a normal family, but they're like, they're not. And as the movie goes on, Godzilla attacks. And at one point she decides to get a job, because it's almost like kind of said like, look, we're not going to get married. And you need to find a wife. So I'm gonna start working, and our neighbor's gonna take care of the kid, and
And
so
he's struggling with his demons, and that's why he's
right.
like, I'm still
He's like, I
still
can't
at
be with you.
war,
I
so
can't.
I can't
Yeah,
be
I
with you.
can't
Yeah.
do anything. So she decides she's like, I'm gonna go do this thing. I'm gonna and like the idea of getting a wife, and that's like big in the culture at that, especially at that point in time.
He's basically
And
like, I'm not allowed to be happy because I should be dead.
right,
And that's what I mean.
So
That's why I'm like, his arc is great. I don't know why you think I
so
wouldn't like it,
she
because you're a
so
stranger to me.
I it had nothing to do with the arc. It was just the first thing. Okay, so just to clarify, first thing, not the whole movie.
The
So
moment
when we
I
got to
see
the
a
end of the
coward
movie-
in a movie, I turn it off. I'm like, I can't even deal with it. I can't even deal with one coward being in a movie. I just shut the stupid movie. I'm like General Patton.
next
There's
movie,
goddamn
next
coward.
Next movie I'm making is just a movie about cowards. Like that's the movie's
It's
gonna be called
Cowards.
Cowards.
Yeah, it's called Cowards.
Cowards. Next movie.
Yeah.
So anyway, she goes off. Godzilla attacks. It's horrific. It's the first time we see Godzilla just devastate an entire city, and he's like, "Oh crap! You know, she's in the city. I got to go save her." She survives this train attack, which also reminded me of Mission Impossible. By the way, when I was thinking about it, I was like, "Oh yeah, it's kind of like Mission Impossible from earlier this year." She survives this train attack, and then Godzilla's about to do his atomic breath, and he does it, but like. She pushes, this is the weird, I thought this part was weird. She pushes him into an alleyway, and then she kind of like sacrifices herself. So she pushes him in the alleyway, and then the blowback from the blast knocks her back, and you're only to assume that she died, and there was no way she could have survived.
Disappears. Yeah.
So now he's motivated. He's like, I've got to kill this Godzilla. He killed my surrogate wife. I got to kill this Godzilla. He's like motivated. You're like on board with him. He's doing all these things. His whole like,
he's got a death wish. He's got a death wish.
He's like, I got to do this.
He's got a death wish, and he's gonna finally make good on his divine wind.
And then we get to the end of the movie, sacrifice, all the great stuff, and then it just turns out the neighbor lady comes with his little girl, and she's like, piece of paper, and he looks at him and he's like, oh my god! And then you find out she's alive. You find out his surrogate wife has been alive for the like second half of the movie, and you thought she was dead, and I was like, kind of took a little bit out of the movie. Like, it's a happier ending, right? But it took a little bit out of me. Because part of me was like, why didn't
because
you
it's
just end up
both
with neighbor lady?
It's
Because it
both.
could have ended up with neighbor lady, you know?
Well, I think it was understood that she was older. I don't think he would have been romantically involved with neighbor lady.
Maybe.
That's like getting
I
with
don't
his
know.
aunt. But the I think the reason why it initially just hit me as like, ugh, was because they did both. They did.
Yeah.
He didn't actually sacrifice himself, and she didn't actually sacrifice herself. Anytime, again, sacrifice makes the best stories. Anytime you negate a sacrifice, it drives me crazy.
Right.
Crazy. Now, the difference is that there's a difference between negating it because somebody meant to give their life and then they didn't, and somebody giving their life and then somebody negating it. Like, had they died needlessly, then that negates the sacrifice, and that sucks. This, at least, you know, she did save him, and he did kill Godzilla temporarily, but they did do the thing they meant to do. So that's where it's okay. But back to back, where he lived and then she lived, you're like, hold on a second. It's kind of like Scream 6, where it was like, did anybody die in this movie?
Yeah.
You know,
Was there
like,
any? Because you're like expecting somebody to get offed, and at the end of that movie, and it, like, nobody, like, there was a part of me, one of the kind of secondary smaller plot lines you have when he's on this boat. As the movie goes on, that like the kind of he gets his little Jaws crew together, right? He gets the scientist guy. There's a boat captain. There is a young guy who's like, he didn't get to fight in the war, but he's got like all that angst of like, I didn't get to fight in the war, and everyone's like, yeah, shut up. You're glad. You should be glad you didn't have to fight in the war. But he's like, I want to fight in the war and stuff.
Yeah.
And then he has his little crew that he eventually meets in the movie. And I liked how they kind of made some parallels with that, where it's like everybody had like this survivor's guilt, and he's the only one who's like, but I wanted to do my part, and I never got a chance to do my part. And I liked how they also gave him an arc where it's like, what are you doing?
I turned into Napoleon.
Are you gonna start pouting about not getting laid?
I lost my erection. Chucky want some. Accidentally hit the button on my chair and I
Please don't
shrunk.
do that. Please don't do that.
Didn't he do that? He was
No.
like, Daddy wants some.
Nom,
And then
nom.
she hiked up her skirt and that movie sucked. Anyway,
Talking about a better
what
movie.
we were talking about.
We were talking about the young guy who's like part of the team. He's like, I want to do my part. And they're just like, no, you're staying home. You're not doing anything. And then sure enough, it's like, no, we actually do need you. And all he does is bring a bunch of tugboats. And he's like, all right, we're going to get Godzilla.
Awesome.
We're going to bring him out of the water.
It was their Dunkirk moment. And that moment was better than all of Dunkirk, where it's just like, we're saved. Like all the ships on the horizon, they're all pull, and I couldn't, because I don't have that much, I don't have a lot of Godzilla in my brain. I kept going back to the moment in Austin Powers, where they're just like they're pointing, and there were moments where I was just like, this is like, especially during that, where you have the scientists and they're pointing and binoculars, and it was so it was the things that I stereotypically know about Godzilla that I was just sitting there being like, this is so awesome. This is so awesome. And then the tugboats show up and they're all at the same time. They're like, pull, they're all working together. And then the sacrifice is happening.
I can't emphasize enough how drastically different this is to the American movies. And I said this earlier, but it's just like, this movie does such a great job of just doing the basics of just telling a great story with human characters.
Yeah.
That the Godzilla isn't a character in this movie as much as he is a force to be reckoned with. He's just the antagonist that they have to deal with, but the characters themselves are well drawn out and really well developed, and this is the best part of the movie. The only thing besides that very end of the movie that kind of lessens it for me, as far as being like Oppenheimer great, because some people have said this is as good as Oppenheimer, this is better than Oppenheimer, it's got Godzilla. My thing is, it's so damn earnest with how like and nonchalant about Godzilla that they're just like, yeah, Godzilla's here, and you're like, okay, I have to buy into the fact that giant lizard monsters exist and people are okay with it, and he never really tells anything about it. You're like,
the first time he shows up, it's just what is that? Oh, that's Godzilla. Who's Godzilla? The locals said that Godzilla's a dinosaur.
He exists.
Like,
it's a dinosaur. He's
what?
here. And you're like, oh,
you
and they're like, we don't have time to explain. We got to kill it with this 20mm gun. 20mm guns can kill anything.
Yeah, and then later,
and then
I don't
he's
think
like the whole movie.
Did anybody even speculate why he grew, or did they just show bombs going off?
They do show the bomb.
To put two and two.
Well,
we were supposed to put two and two together. That's where certain things like that. After they've made 40 of these movies, I guess I can't fault them for needing to explain it to a newbie like me. But I'm sitting there being like,
they make it.
Should they be explaining this? Because I kept thinking this feels like the first in a series, especially by the time you get to the ending, it's clear there's going to be a sequel.
They made this movie in a way that was going to be. It's kind of a prequel to God. It's sort of like a semi-prequel slash hard remake of the first one, because the first movie, it's not done with this care. It's almost like there were times when I was watching this where it felt like they were retelling the story of the first Godzilla film, but like from a very different perspective and more of like a just grounded human perspective. But they put a lot more story and thought besides just giant monster movie, atomic age movie, fear of the atom bomb, and like a lot more and less of like, oh, let's tell you, oh my gosh, he's doing this now, and now he's destroying this, and now what are we going to do, and here's the plan, and down more to like, let's ground it to a character and a group of characters and their journey and how they're going to survive this whole thing. And I like that. I thought that was it is a hard remake of the original, but it's done really well, and I appreciate it. And I also like the period aspect of it. Kind of took out the silliness and the comic bookness of some of the later films where it's like, oh, there's aliens involved, or oh, we've got a giant spaceship, or oh, we've got to go into the center of the earth where the monsters all live, and silly things like that. It's like, it's fun, like in a comic book thing, but like this was more grounded, and you're like, I'm on board with this. This is great.
And the whole sequence, the Jaws sequence, where Godzilla destroys their partner boat when they're,
I love that.
Shimmy's whole thing was that he's working for the Gov to find mines that I guess
U.S.
both the Japanese and the Americans.
They said U.S. and Japan and left them on. Yeah.
And so they're destroying all these mines and decommissioning all these mines. And that whole sequence was so gripping and so fantastic and so terrifying. You know, that's what I mean. Where, as I said in my quick review, my suspension of disbelief was at the level of a kid, where I'm like, oh my God, giant Godzilla is going to get them. And it's just terrifying looking Godzilla just swimming just above the water. And maybe it specifically
like,
it took me
like
back
by
to the
that
days
time-
of Jurassic Park. So
by that time in the
that whole
movie where I
sequence
was
so
like,
good.
by the time that part of the movie gets along, I'm like, I'm on board. I'm like, okay, I'm buying this now. But I think it's just the initial like, yeah, Godzilla exists, and you're like, okay, I just got to buy this. Like, there's no mystery led into it as much as some of these. I think other Godzilla movies would make more of a scene of like, wait, what is
Again,
this?
what's
Like,
that?
where's it from?
Oh,
And,
that's
you know,
Godzilla. Who's Godzilla? The locals say he's a dinosaur.
He's a giant
it's like if
lizard.
Barney
He's a
showed
giant
up,
lizard.
just like
Right.
a giant purple dinosaur. Yeah, why not? You know, and everybody just goes along with it. So you said this
I think
against
it's
Guardians.
under Guardians.
I think
it should be under Guardians. I think Guardians, Guardians excels is like there's no even though that movie is a straight up science fiction movie and it is not grounded by any means necessarily. I think it is just well done by a character. Like, it is so focused on its characters that we're never having to like rethink like the suspension of disbelief, because that's already been broken. We already know what we're getting into. We're like, oh, this is a science fiction space movie, and you can make the allegory that's like it's just space pirates, you know, it's pirates saving their friends or whatever other story you want to put in there, a western or whatever. But you're already on board with all the characters. You got to understand their motivations. There's no weird, silly, contrived endings that just feel slightly tacked on. Like, it's pretty solid all the way through. I don't think it's a masterpiece, but I definitely think it is overall all around a great movie. And then when it comes to this and Turtles, I don't know. I think on the level of just the fact that there's times when you're watching this movie and you forget you're watching a Godzilla movie, I think that in itself just elevates it above TMNT. TMNT, like Ninja Turtles, Mutant Mayhem, it's a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, I'm watching a really fun, silly kids movie with a lot of heart. But then you watch this movie and you're like, I'm watching an allegoric drama piece that is like, at times you're like, oh, I forgot I was watching a Godzilla movie. And you're like, those moments feel like they belong in the top 5. But then when you forget, you're like, oh wait, this is a Godzilla movie. You're like, oh wait, I forgot I was watching. By the way, Godzilla, that's what the locals call him. He exists. And you're like, okay,
Godzilla.
this movie that's the things that bring it down for me. But like, I think I think that's a perfect spot. I think it's a perfect spot.
Seconded. That's all I'm going to say. All well said. I'm not going to fight you on any of that. Godzilla! No, I'll do it right. -1. So it's -1 because everybody felt negative.
Let me read.
No. Let me read
what it is. The -1 refers to the fact that Japan had already been devastated by World War II, brought it down to 0. It's down to nothing, down to nothingness. It's in rubble. It's in ruin. We destroyed the F out of Japan. But with the emergence of Godzilla, it puts Japan into the negative, because after we've already been devastated down to 0, we're devastated even more. So under 0 is -1. So you're Godzilla -1. That's why it's called Godzilla -1. I don't like the title, but I get it.
It would have been nice if your title is that cryptic, maybe try to write it into the script a little bit, just to lead us by the nose a little bit, you know, just somebody makes some
dialogue where it's like,
line
yeah,
of
we were already
dialogue that
down to
refers
nothing,
to
and
that.
now we're even like, now what are we down to?
Exactly.
We're we're -0, you know, something like that. Something silly, but -1.
But yeah, it's irregardless, it's still it still deserves that spot right there at number 8, I believe it. Not -1, because that would be above the list.
Right.
Because above Oppenheimer,
we should have just 0,
put it, and then -1.
That's where it should go. We should put it above Oppenheimer.
Remember we talked about doing that to Knights of the Zodiac? Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're like,
What's
"It
your
should
negative
be
one
negative. Shouldn't be on this. Should be on this list. Doesn't even
Yeah.
deserve to be on this list." I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I did see a list. I saw a list of the worst movies, and out of all the ones, there's like the worst movies of the year. Out of all of the list, the only movie we had seen was Knights of the Zodiac, and it was sure enough, it was on the list.
It was
So
a list of
it's
the
like,
worst
yep, that was
movies?
the worst movies of the year. I think it was like Rotten Tomatoes worst movies of the year. And because we're getting the top 10 list at the end of the year. Worst movies of the year. Worst was the Winnie the Pooh movie, but before that was Knights of the Zodiac. All the other ones we never watched. I think some of them were streaming movies or movies that just were like, why'd bother watching that?
Yeah.
But that was the one that was like on the list. I'm like, yeah, that was the worst movie I've seen this year. And I know you keep saying like Cocaine Bear maybe had a bet shot of being worse than that. And I'm like, no, how that movie was really bad. Cocaine Bear knew what it was. This movie was trying to be something it was never going to be, and it was bad. Godzilla, on the other hand, let me know. Godzilla, that's what the locals call it. It's on the island. That's going to be my new
that's requesting Thanksgiving.
Next. Oh yeah. Well,
I heard it was good.
Here's the thing. We're getting to a point where because we're already seeing a year's worth of movies. So a movie
that's
a
52
week.
right there.
We're already at 52 right there. But
yeah.
The list, I think this week we're seeing Wonka. I think that's the next movie that we're actually looking
terrified
to go see.
I'm so scared
and
to watch it.
I'm gonna go see I think I'm taking my kids. We're gonna go see Wonka. Originally we were gonna see Poor Things this week, but then everyone started talking about Godzilla like it's the greatest thing, you need to see it. And so we were like, okay, let's go see Godzilla. And it's the greatest thing and you should go see it. So yeah, Godzilla was great. Again, a little melodramatic at times, but overall, like a pretty damn good movie.
Yeah.
So, and then I think we're getting at that point where like Christmas comes around and like every movie comes out. So it's like you've got The Color Purple, you've got Iron Claw, you've got Aquaman, and then there's Ferrari. Like there's like 3 or 4 movies that are all coming out like around Christmas. So I don't know if we're gonna, because we're not doing anything, we might be like, all right, Charlie, tomorrow we're gonna go see this, and then we just watch it, and they're like, tomorrow we're gonna go see this. I don't know.
We said we're never gonna move on to 2024. We're just gonna do 2023 for the next 2023 30
forever.
years.
I'm in prison.
We'll never run out of movies that came out,
of course,
this year.
Of course. So, but yes, and then I did want to see Poor Things, but I think this movie trumped seeing that, unfortunately. So we're like, okay, we're gonna go see this instead. And there were other movies I wanted to go see and we didn't see those. So Wonka's this next week, and then the following week is either Aquaman, Iron Claw, Ferrari, or The Color Purple. So we might see all of those. We might see 1 or 2 of them. I don't know. And then
and as we're getting close to the end of the year, I'm down to just narrow it down to things that we anticipate might break the top 10 rather than, wasting our time with like another, the Nun 3 or something like that's kind of where my head's at. But anyway,
that's why I'm maybe we should go see those. We should at least, I think at the end of the day, I'm like, let's see Iron Claw or Ferrari. I think those 2 definitely look like they're.
It's a Michael Mann movie. I mean, we, as we've pointed out.
Oh yeah, Ferrari is. That's
every major director has a movie out this year, and to throw Michael Mann on this list, you probably should. So, anyway, to help me out with his name, Tamagotchi.
No, it's a K. Hold on, let me get the spelling.
This is me doing an insensitive
Takashi. T-A-K-A-S-H-I.
Wait. T-A-K-A.
Where do you want his last name?
No, first name. Okay.
First name. T-A-K-A-S-H-I.
Takashi.
Takashi.
Okay, for Takashi.
Yamazaki. Takashi Yamazaki. And then hold on, let's move it to the last slide. I think I have him on there.
All right,
next slide.
Yay.
Boom.
For Takashi, because you made an awesome movie.
I hope he makes an American film. Like I hope they're like, oh, this guy made a really
no, because they'll make him make it terrible. They'll be like, we order you to make it awful. Yeah,
port him over. I mean, or he just keeps making films. He might make films in Japan and be like, what's the guy who did Parasite? Who's also a great filmmaker, but he's only
the Korean filmmaker. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't remember his name.
They're like, hey, come to Hollywood. He's like, why would I do that? You're going to make me
I can make all my
garbage,
movies
and then
here.
you're going to molest me. And everybody that come with me, you're going to molest. So let's not do that. I'm going to stay far away from you in Korea. And I'm just
You
going to keep
just hate
making dope
cowards.
stuff. Send your money. Yeah. Nothing but a goddamn coward. So, yeah. Anyway, any wise words for Mr. Takashi McCurdy?
Stop working so damn hard and making creepy Godzillas. Like, just chill. Okay.
Do the opposite of that.
Prove
To the opposite of what you just said.
opposite of what I just said.
For Takashi, 6'9".
Yep.
Ooh.